Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 30 of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, I'd like to visit two main concepts, two main ideas: love and harmony. And I've put VS there because I think, especially in the spiritual realm, love is a term that you hear all the time. And I find that we've really polluted the term love and overused it to a point where you just say love, but people say love, but they have no idea what they're actually talking about. And this video is also going to clarify a bit of things about absolutes versus the relative. And there's a lot of confusion between the two. You see, there's this tendency for some people to try to bring in the absolute into the relative. And that is when you hear some of these non-dual people that say that everything is an illusion, everything is fine, you don't exist, we don't exist, no, nothing exists, only this exists right now, and they just, they live life as if nothing had meaning, nothing was important, and to a certain extent they are right, but they are right from the point of view of the absolute, even though they're sort of negating their incarnation in the relative. The opposite is also true, like putting the relative onto the absolute. And that is when you put your dual vision onto the absolute, talking about light versus darkness, and the battle, and there's this battle between good and evil, and all these things. From the point of view of the absolute, that doesn't exist. And so there needs to be a sort of a balance or a way to integrate the relative and the absolute, and making that bridge, the connection between the two, is really what heaven on earth is. It's sitting right in the middle, in that sweet spot between having a connection to the absolute and yet acknowledging that you live in the relative, and that certain things are painful or not very pleasant, and so how does it tie into this love versus harmony that I was talking about? Well, when you look at love and you look at the absolute, the reason why love is the highest concept is that, well, the way I describe the absolute, because there's no way of describing it, it's beyond concept. But if you had to give it a concept, let's say it's just infinity. Infinity, as in everything that can possibly ever exist, that you can imagine or not imagine, beyond imagination. Because infinity cannot be anything less than what it is, it has to love itself unconditionally. Unconditionally, and that's important. Because otherwise, it would not be infinite. It would be infinite minus whatever it doesn't like evil, whatever that is. But that cannot be. It's like trying to subtract the number minus 35 because you don't like it. It doesn't work. Infinity is infinity. It has no choice but to love itself unconditionally. But what that means also is that there is no hierarchy in terms of gradation, in terms of the love, which means that in infinity, it's almost as if you had a painting where here you had somebody killing another person, murdering or with a gun. And here you had a mother nurturing a little baby. And the absolute loves everything about that. Because because there is no meaning in the absolute, there's nothing really, it's just existence, pure existence. All of this is beautiful. All of this is just color. All of this is just like a painting, a beautiful painting. And looking at this scene or that scene is the same from its point of view because it's just beautiful. It's just beautifully painted, beautifully colored, beautifully. It's just like when you visit a museum and you look at a painting, um, the the um, the beauty of how well that scene is painted matches the beauty of this scene. There's no difference. So the problem is many people use this love as being the most important thing in the world and say love, love, love. We need to love everyone, love everything, love, send this. But is that even possible from the human relative mindset and frame of mind? And just do the test of you walking in the street, and you look at a pile of dog shit and a flower, and be honest and try to see if you can feel the same amount of love for both. And consider that both of them are just as beautiful, just as deserving of your love as the other. And not saying, "Ooh, I hate this. I want to avoid, stepping on it, and it stinks and whatever." And oh, that beautiful flower, I want to smell it. It's beautiful, and I want to protect it. That's what happens when you're part of the relative. We are designed to give things meaning where there is none, because without meaning, there is no experience. Understand? If we didn't give meaning to anything, then you may as well just dissolve instantly into the absolute, because you would not be able to make any kind of value judgments as to what to do next, because everything is just as meaningful. Staying there and not moving, for instance, for all eternity would be just as meaningful as going to get a meal, going to get a sandwich. Um, the reconciliation between absolute and relative is to loosen up a bit the importance that we give to meaning and not give meanings an absolute value. Give them a relative value, and that is your own. Reclaim your power to give relative meaning to things according to what you think is true, or what you want to experience. And there, if 7 billion people do that, that's what's called ascension. That's when we're free from this kind of world. Right now, many people are on the meaning as an absolute, which is absolute in terms of materialist science, saying, for instance, there is no meaning. Well, actually, saying there is no meaning and everything happens by chance is meaning, is still meaning. When things are meaningless, you're not defending anything. If you're defending the materialist view, then you're still using that as meaning. But there are many other meanings that people want as an absolute, like the monotheist religions, all of that. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that we are incapable, at least at present, in our own in our human condition, to transpose unconditional love to the relative. It's just not possible. We can only love in relative terms. And if you read many spiritual books, often you find that people, when they say they love people, they're actually trying to possess something, they're attached to things. The kind of love that is unconditional is extremely hard to achieve, and it's only the feat of a few select spiritual teachers and yogis or gurus, which I'm not part of at all. I know it's the ultimate goal, and one day, perhaps, we'll be able to achieve that. But that is only, in my mind, when we will have become creators, conscious creators. That is, when we sort of realize that we create worlds in which there is dog shit and flowers because we understand the interconnectedness and link and how all of these things kind of work together and why they need each other to exist, to coexist. When we're conscious creators of our realities, when we become sort of gods or whatever, or we awaken to that kind of power of consciously creating things, then you unconditionally love whatever world you create. Just like kind of when you're in your own imagination, because that imagination, you're conscious of, just close your eyes and imagine anything. Imagination. When you imagine anything in your mind, if you just try that exercise and try to imagine a dog shit and the flower in your imagination, and you'll find that in your imagination it's much easier to love them unconditionally because you are conscious that they are your own creation. They're part of you, they're inside of you, so you cannot really, emulate that kind of feeling of stepping in a real, quote unquote, real dog shit in our relative world. So, how does this tie in with harmony? Now, well, just a minute. Unconditional love. So, should we completely discard this term? Just building on what I was just saying, imagination and conscious creation. Unconditional love is actually something to apply, and this is really important, inside. So, to yourself. The only thing that at present in our relative reality, except for a few exceptionally ascended yogis and spiritual masters, the only thing that you can actually love unconditionally is yourself. And you will be doing the world a great favor if you can love yourself unconditionally, first and foremost, before even trying to apply that kind of feeling to the outside world. Because once you stop battling against yourself, you find peace of mind. And understand that the battle against parts of yourself that you hate is the first step towards creating opposition and discord and all this stuff on the outside, as a mirror reflection to how much you hate yourself. And you find that very often in people, and I have examples in my own family, where you have people that become extremely religious, dogmatically extremely religious, after they've gone through a divorce, a very shameful divorce, for instance, or they've done things they're really ashamed of. Suddenly they turn into this kind of absolutist justice warrior that wants to be righteous and tell people what to do and how to act. But it's just hiding the fact that they're so ashamed of what they've done and they hate themselves so much that they think that by becoming a judge and sort of blaming people and trying to manipulate and control people on the outside, they're going to heal that kind of or get an absolution for the things they're really ashamed of and the parts of themselves that they hate. But that's never going to happen, of course. So, love unconditional love inside yourself first and foremost. And what about the outside then? What can you do for the outside? And that's where harmony comes into play. Harmony is a very magical thing. It is what I would coin a perfect imperfection. It is something that really reconciles the relative and the absolute in a very, very nice way. And I'm always using the example of an orchestra playing a symphony. Now, if you know anything about vibrations in music, and this is why it's really important to take music as a metaphor, because ultimately, as we all know, everything is a vibration. There are dissonance, which is when, for instance, two people play completely out of tune and the result is absolutely horrendous to the ears. But then there's something that you never really hear, actually, perfection or perfect tuning. That is, just imagine if every single musician played the exact same note or the exact same vibration, like really perfectly the same. And if that happens, well, there I've made videos about this, about perfect symmetry and the fact that if one vibration exists, then the vibration of opposite phase also exists. And if you reunite them, they cancel each other out, and that then everything returns back to void. So dissonance or imperfection, chaos. Let's call this chaos. From dissonance and chaos, nothing can be built. It's like everything exists in a stasis, as a still world with no experience, because the moment you try to experience things, just disintegrate. You kill each other, everything just destroys itself. The experience cannot even launch itself. Basically, it just stalls because it doesn't know where to go. Pure chaos, dissonance. And then you have perfection, which is everything experiences itself infinitely fast because it's so perfect. It never hesitates. It just, even if these vibrations are the same, they just add on top of each other to infinity, and it just adds to the intensity of the vibration, but it doesn't give it anything. It doesn't give it richness or depth. Or so in one extreme, perfect chaos, there's this stasis, nothing get experienced. And in perfection, order, perfect order, you could say, everything experiences itself so fast, infinitely fast, in fact, that it's the same as if it were perfect chaos. And in between the two, you have what I call perfect imperfection, which is, if you look at how an orchestra, the reason why it sounds so beautifully is because every single musician plays slightly, just slightly out of tune. So they play the same note, but just slightly differently. And that's a phenomenon called a chorus. And so the richness, the beauty of the sound of an orchestra is because everybody sort of is perfectly imperfect or imperfectly perfect. It doesn't really matter how you twist it, but they play slightly off tune. And the combination of all of those slightly off tune notes gives it this depth and richness. And it's again a perfect marriage between the absolute and the relative. And so, how does this tie in again to our real life experience? Harmony simply means that you're seeking a kind of harmonious interactions with humans, but harmony as within a symphony. In a symphony, in music, for instance, sometimes you have minor chords, sometimes you have dissonance that is then resolved in music. Like, for instance, you have a certain chord that is dissonant, that is being played. And then there's a resolution, which you call a resolution, with another chord that is being played. Now, I'm just putting notes there just so you know that there's like this progression of tensions and releases. And release. And of course, if you listen to a symphony, it's a whole experience. It's ups and downs. Um, it's just like sometimes it's sad, sometimes it's beautiful, sometimes it's very joyful. But it just plays. It plays. It goes on. It's not like that's the idea of presence that you hear so many spiritual teachers teaching, is that it's not like in a symphony you have a repetition of this one dissonant chord or this tension that comes in all the time, incessantly, and you never move towards release or resolution. It just moves, it flows naturally through all of these states. And you, as a listener, you let yourself sort of experience all those progressions one after the other. And that is harmony on the outside, which is a kind of perfect blend between you recognize that your interactions with everyone are not perfect, but they're not totally imperfect or chaotic. They're somewhere in between, and you always strive for release or resolution without negating the fact that there are going to be tensions along the way. So you still have fights with your wife. You still are frustrated in the traffic jams, but it's you experience it as a natural flow of tensions that go towards release and resolution without stopping on it and paying too much attention to it. And that keeps this relative world going. Because right now we're kind of in reaching the limits of what human beings can experience, or the symphony of humanity that we're playing is sort of stalling, if you will, because we're reaching the limits of this balance between perfect and perfection. Um, we need to find a little bit more harmony in order for the experience to continue, because we are too dissonant, a bit too dissonant. Um, and that's a value judgment only based on the fact that, I mean, at least that's my interpretation. The experience, the show must go on, let's say, show must go on. Or, in other words, the experience wants to go on. The experience wants to continue. We want to experience new things. The universe wants to create new structures. It just wants to experience itself more and more and more in more and more sophisticated ways. And it's not edging us or forcing us towards harmony because it's good or because whatever. It just wants more experience, and it requires humans to reach a higher state of harmony in order to do so. Another thing that I'll end on, I think, explaining is, if you look at your own human body, the way it works, it's not like all of your cells have eternal life and no cells die and no cells are born, and they're just pure light that lives on forever. And it's also not like your body is so perfect that there are never any quirks or any problems or any diseases or anything. It's just that overall, on the whole, your body functions harmoniously, just well enough to allow for the experience of the relative. If it were a little bit too perfect, then you wouldn't be able to experience the relative. You'd be in the absolute. And so you have to have always some kind of balance here to be struck. And so harmony, but not too perfect. Perfect imperfection. The reconciliation between two extremes, two seemingly contradictory concepts, which brings things, which allows for experience, the most experience possible. And it's a trade-off. So if you have too much harmony, then it restricts the experience, because there's just so many things that you cannot experience. You cannot experience murder, you cannot experience rape, you cannot experience war. But these are experiences. From the point of view of the absolute, they are interesting to experience. The absolute wants to know what it feels like to have war, to have murder. And even though it wants to experience that, it doesn't want to experience that to the point at which the experience itself breaks down, because everybody just ends up killing everybody else. And now this concept of harmony, I encourage you to find, I don't know which video it was, which Brainstorm, I think it maybe was 27 or 28, where I talk about karma and a sort of a new interpretation of karma, which is not to pay for your older sins and whatever, or pay for your bad deeds with and then rebalancing and everything. It's more about seeking harmony. Um, Harmony, as in, how can the absolute integrate or combine everything that it is in a harmonious manner? And here, I've given the metaphor in that video about, for instance, sadomasochist clubs for the experience of rape, but in a consensual and harmonious way, because obviously the people that are there to have that experience out of their own free will. Or playing laser tag instead of experiencing world war. You have the same kind of thrills, but you don't actually have to kill people. And maybe I'll do just a video specifically on this, because it requires more in-depth sort of explanation, and this video is already long enough. But just think of the violin. Imagine if the violin is just a pure concept, and with it you can play horribly or beautifully. What the absolute is trying to do through harmony is how to combine all of those possibilities in a harmonious way. What does this mean? It means that when you play beautifully, it's on stage, and when you play horribly, it's in the music academy. So it's basically finding the right context for expressing everything that you can do with a violin, but in a way which is harmonious. If you reverse those two, then you understand that we have a problem. If people were playing horribly on the music stages and played beautifully when they were alone in a rehearsing room, what kind of stupid arrangement would that be? And arguably, that's where the experience sort of breaks down. And the same for humans. If we play at war in virtual reality games, and on the outside we're kind of trying to edge towards this unconditional love and peace with each other, fine. If it's the other way around, then we really have a problem. So I hope you find this video interesting. So the takeaway is seek harmony, which is the only thing that we're basically capable in this relative world, I think, at this stage of revolution. For most people on the outside, so with whatever you experience on the outside, just try to find a way to experience it in a harmonious way, or arrange the kind of things that you find on the outside in a harmonious way. For instance, use the dog shit as fertilizers for your flower. That's one example. And then unconditional love for you, yourself, on the inside, to stop fighting and hating yourself for mistakes you've done or things like that, so you can move on. Because that is one major obstacle for humanity moving forward, is all of those self-hating emotions that are polluting the human unconscious. So I hope you found this interesting, and talk to you in the next video whenever that comes around.